Well, yes, welcome once again to another Creekside Book by Book, going through Genesis. Today we're going to be going through chapters 24 through most of 26. The last couple verses in 26 we're going to save till next week because it just opens up a whole new can of worms that I don't want to dive into tonight. And so as we are walking through this, there's going to be some sections that will feel like they are repeats from Abraham's life. And I think that's intentional from the narrator, trying to help us to see how Abraham and Isaac are different. Because last week we walked through the life of Abraham. Isaac was born. Abraham sacrificed Isaac. Sarah died. A lot of things happened in the last week. And if you weren't with us, I did post that on YouTube today. So it was a little delayed. The holiday really messed up a lot of my normal rhythms for the week. And so this week, the transition is going to move from Abraham to Isaac. And we are going to be walking through the life of Isaac. And Isaac is a very interesting character in the text here because he doesn't really do much. He's a much more passive person than Abraham or Jacob. And so right between the two is Isaac, where things seem to happen more to him than him being an achiever, a go-getter. So, and so even the first part that we're going to look at today is Isaac being getting a wife. It all happens to him, and he doesn't go find the wife. The wife is brought to him. So, let's just jump in. Genesis chapter 24, starting in verse 1. And I'm going to read a large section here. All right. Abraham was now very old, and the Lord had blessed him in every way. He said to the senior servants in his household, the one in charge of all he had, "Put your hand under my thigh. I want you to swear by the Lord, that the God of heaven and the God of earth, that you will not get a wife for my son from the daughters of the Canaanites among whom I am living, but will go to my country and my own relatives and get a wife for my son Isaac." The servant asked him, "What if the woman is unwilling to come back with me to this land? Shall I then take your son back to the country you came from?" "Make sure that you do not take my son back there," Abraham said. "The Lord God of heaven, who brought me out of my father's household and my native land, and who spoke to me and promised me on oath, saying, 'To your offspring I will give this land,' he will send his angel before you so that you can get a wife for my son from there. If the woman is unwilling to come back with you, then you will be released from this oath of mine. Only do not take my son back there." So the servant put his hand under the thigh of his master Abraham and swore an oath to him concerning this matter. The servant left, taking with him 10 of his master's camels, loaded with all kinds of good things from his master. He set out for Aram Naharaim and made his way to the town of Nahor. He had the camels kneel down near the well outside the town. It was toward evening, the time women go out to draw water. Then he prayed, "Lord God of my master Abraham, make me successful today and show kindness to my master Abraham. See, I am standing beside this spring, and the daughter of the townspeople are coming out to draw water. May it be that when I say to a young woman, 'Please let down your jar that I may have a drink,' and she says, 'Drink, and I'll water your camels too,' let her be the one you have chosen for your servant Isaac. By this I will know that you have shown kindness to my master." Before he had finished praying, Rebekah came out with her jar on her shoulder. She was the daughter of Bethuel, son of Milcah, who was the wife of Abraham's brother Nahor. The woman was very beautiful, a virgin. No man had ever slept with her. She went down to the spring, filled her jar, and came up again. The servant hurried to meet her and said, "Please give me a little water from your jar." "Drink, my lord," she said, and quickly lowered the jar to her hands and gave him a drink. After she had given him a drink, she said, "I'll draw water for your camels too, until they have had enough to drink." So she quickly emptied her jar into the trough, ran back to the well to draw more water, and drew enough for all his camels. Without saying a word, the man watched her closely to learn whether or not the Lord had made his journey successful. When the camels had finished drinking, the man took out a gold nose ring weighing a beka and 2 gold bracelets weighing 10 shekels. Then he asked, "Whose daughter are you? Please tell me, is there room in your father's house for us to spend the night?" She answered him, "I am the daughter of Bethuel, son of Milcah, bore to Nahor." And she added, "We have plenty of straw and fodder, as well as room for you to spend the night." Then the man bowed down and worshiped the Lord, saying, "Praise be to the Lord, the God of my master Abraham, who has not abandoned his kindness and faithfulness to my master. As for me, the Lord has led me on the journey to the house of my master's relatives." All right, so a lot happening in this section. Starts out with Abraham making a covenant with this servant, the person who's overseeing his entire house. And the nature of the covenant and the way they make the covenant is unusual. He says, "Put your hand under my thigh." And one of the cultural elements there is that this is a very vulnerable place to be for Abraham and for the servant. Like, you can really hurt somebody in that area of the body. And so the covenant making is saying, like, I'm trusting you completely. And so this is the nature of the way that they're coming to this agreement. And what is he asking him to do is he's asking his servant to go back to Nahor, the town that his brother named, and um, to find a wife there. Now, last week there was a little aside as we were walking through where the people came from that area and told Abraham about his family. And so Abraham knows now that he has the son of the promise, Isaac. He knows that family members are growing back in his hometown. And so he is responsible as the patriarch to help make sure that the lineage continues. And so he is wanting to ensure that the the line of his family is not intermixed with the people from Canaan. And so he's sending the servant back to hometown to find a person who is in the family line, distant enough, like a second cousin, essentially, for Sarah or for Isaac to marry. And this is something that was not completely unusual, but it was intentional to help make sure that they weren't bringing in any kind of idolatry or false gods from the Canaanite religions. And so this is something other cultures would have done. The term for it is endogamy. And so so this is part of the process. Even Sarah is is a close relative to Abraham. So it's not completely unusual during these times. It is weird in our mind. Um, and like I would never want that for any of us to say, go marry your cousin. Just is not normal for our culture, but it was different. It was okay for them. So that's what it was. And part of the um, part of the drive here for Abraham as well is to ensure that his inheritance is going to Isaac, who will have a family, because the Lord has blessed him in every way. That's how the passage like opens up. Abraham has been greatly blessed already, and so he wants to ensure that like he wants to see Isaac married before he dies also. He wants to see the promise continue to move forward. So he's doing everything he can to make sure that happens. And so the servant asks, like, when he's asking, like, what if she says no? Like, what am I going to do? And he says, just go do that. Do not bring Isaac there. Like, you cannot let Isaac leave the land that God had promised to Abraham. He is making a stand here. Remember, Abraham left to go to Egypt. He had a couple times gone up around the Sea of Galilee area to fight the kings from the east. He's had times where he has left the land that God had promised. And so now Abraham is being very intentional, saying, we're staying in the land. Isaac's not leaving this land. whatever you do, do not take him back home. Keep him here, because this is the land that God has promised. And so the servant goes, and it's very interesting how he asks the Lord to help him see, because this is called a mechanistic oracle, where he is giving God like specific instructions, like this is how I'm going to know that this is the woman that you want Isaac to marry. So I'm going to ask for water, and she's going to be willing to water the give me water, but then also water all the camels. Like this will be the sign for me. And so it's not exactly the way that I advise people to pray for God's confirmation. Results may vary. This is a unique situation, to say the least, but everything that he prays comes to pass. And so the Lord is clearly leading and directing the servant to Rebecca. And so she does everything well, surpasses expectations. And the servant is so grateful, and he gives her jewelry as gifts to say, like, I want you to be a part of Abraham's family. Who are you? Like asking all the questions, like to get more confirmation about who she is and her heritage. And so she says, "Yeah, I'm Bethuel's daughter." And yeah, so he says, "Can I come over?" And she says, "Yes." So the next section is a lot of recap of what we just read. And so I'm going to kind of skim verses 28 through 44, because he's just kind of telling, they go back to um, her mother's household and father's household, and she tells everybody, tells her brother Laban. Now Laban's going to come back in the future. He's going to be trouble. Tells her brother Laban about the man, and so then he comes and they start interrogating a little bit about their relationship, like how did they meet, what's going on. And so the servant says, "I'm Abraham's servant," and they're like, "Oh, Abraham, our relative. Okay, great. Tell us more." And he says, "The Lord has blessed my master. He's become very wealthy. He has given him sheep and cattle, silver and gold, male and female servants, camels and donkeys. My master's wife, Sarah, has borne him a son in her old age, and he has given him everything he owns. And my master made me swear an oath and said, 'You must not get a wife for my son from the daughters of the Canaanites in whose land I live, but go to my father's family, to my own clan, and get a wife for my son.'" And so he's trying to set the picture, like, "Hey, I want your daughter to go and marry my master's son, the son you've never met." And Abraham left, and you maybe even thought, like, "Well, that guy's crazy just leaving like this." But God has blessed him so much, and everything that Abraham has received as a blessing from the Lord, he's giving to Isaac. So if your daughter goes with me to marry Isaac, she will be very wealthy. And so he's really setting the picture for this family. And so then he talks about the oracle, the way he prayed, and how Rebecca um, completed and fulfilled all of these different things that the servant asked. Um, and so when so he's going through all these details. One of the key parts in this is they know how old Abraham is. They know how old Sarah is. And so one of the concerns could be, is Isaac also really old at this point? And so when he says in her old age, the servant is trying to help make clear this detail. Like Isaac is not as nearly as old as you may think he is, having been gone for so long. Isaac was born to Sarah when she was already 90 years old, in her old age. And so it explains why he's not married yet. It explains like why this is not going to be weird for Rebecca to marry him. He's within a range that is acceptable of age. So then pick up in verse 50. Laban and Bethuel answered, "This is from the Lord. We can say nothing to you one way or the other." So they're confirming, like, okay, God is doing something cool here. Here is Rebekah, take her and go, and let her become the wife of your master's son, as the Lord has directed. When Abraham's servant heard what they said, he bowed down to the ground before the Lord. Then the servant brought out gold and silver jewelry and articles of clothing and gave them to Rebekah. He also gave her costly gifts to her brother and to her mother. Then he and the men who were with him ate and drank and spent the night there. When they got up the next morning, he said, "Send me on my way to my master." But her brother and her mother replied, "Let the young woman remain with us 10 days or so. Then you may go." But he said to them, "Do not detain me now, that the Lord has granted success to my journey. Send me on my way, so I may go to my master." Then they said, "Let's call the young woman and ask her about it." So they called Rebekah and asked her, "Will you go with this man?" "I will go," she said. So they sent their sister Rebekah on her way, along with her nurse and Abraham's servant and his men. And they blessed Rebekah and said to her, "Our sister, may you increase to thousands upon thousands. May your offspring possess the cities of their enemies." Then Rebekah and her attendants got ready and mounted the camels and went back with the man. So the servant took Rebekah and left. Now Isaac had come from Beer Lahai Roi, for he was living in the Negev. He went out to the field one evening to meditate. And as he looked up, he saw camels approaching. Rebekah also looked up and saw Isaac. She got down from her camel and asked the servant, "Who is that man in the field coming to meet us?" "He is my master," the servant answered. So she took her veil and covered herself. Then the servant told Isaac all he had done. Isaac brought her into the tent of his mother Sarah, and he married Rebekah, so she became his wife, and he loved her. And Isaac was comforted after his mother's death. Okay, so the servant is, in talking about the commitment, but like to bring her out, and they're like, "Yeah, okay, go ahead and take her." And so it's yes, all is winning, and then they throw in this, "Let her stay with here for a day or 10 days." And this is a colloquialism where it actually is like, "Let us keep her here for quite a while, undetermined." And so the servant is like, "No, I need to go right now. Do you guys not understand how old Abraham is? He could die at any minute. I need to bring her back to Isaac." And so they finally let her go. He gives them all the gifts and all the things, like, to say, like, "Yeah, these dowry type gifts are all part of this, as a way of honoring the family, and helping show, like, we're giving her here, she's going to have even more there. You have nothing to worry about for Rebekah." And so they let her go, and she says, like, "I am more than willing to go." And then the blessing that they give to Rebekah is interesting, because it echoes the blessing and the promise that the Lord has made to Abraham. "Our sister, may you increase to thousands upon thousands. May her offspring possess the cities of their enemies," which is ultimately the story of the people of Israel. Is her Rebekah's offspring will possess the cities of their enemies. This will come to pass. And so even though the family of uh, Laban and Bethuel, they're not necessarily followers of the Lord the way that Abraham is, they're still blessing Abraham's family in a way that is consistent with Yahweh's blessing for his chosen people here. And so they head back, and Bir Laharoi is where we saw. Oh my word! Oh, what's her name? Hagar. Hagar encountered the Lord there, and the well, Bir Laharoi, is the God who sees me. And so Ishmael and Hagar are, still around, and Isaac is willing to be there. So, like, it's kind of an indicator that they're not of best of friends, but they're also not enemies. Ishmael and Isaac, they're not quarreling between the two sons. And so he's down in their region in the Negev, and the servant comes and he sees them. And the way that Isaac responds to Rebecca is with joy and like immediately bringing her into Sarah's tent. And Sarah was the matriarch, and so he is honoring Sarah and honoring Rebecca and marrying her, bringing her into the tent, saying, "Now you are the matriarch in our family." And because they were a wealthy family, they had a lot of flocks and herds and all kinds of different resources. They would have had many tents, and so Abraham and Sarah probably both had their own tents anyway. Um, and so the yeah, so now Isaac's married. Huzzah! Marriage is what brings us together today, and just in time, because in chapter 25, verse 1, we read, Abraham had taken another wife, whose name was Keturah. She bore him Zimran, Jokshan, Medan, Midian, Ishbak, and Shua. Jokshan was the father of Sheba and Dedan, and the descendants of Dedan were the Asherites, the Lethushites, and the Leumites. The son of Midian were Ephah, Epher, Hanak, Abidah, and Eldaah. All these were descendants of Keturah. Abraham left everything he owned to Isaac, but while he was still living, he gave gifts to the sons of his concubines and sent them away from his son Isaac to the land of the east. Abraham lived 175 years. Then Abraham breathed his last and died at a good old age, an old man and full of years, and he was gathered to his people. His sons Isaac and Ishmael buried him in the cave of Machpelah near Mamre, in the field of Ephron, son of Zohar the Hittite, the field Abraham had bought from the Hittites. There Abraham was buried with his wife Sarah. After Abraham's death, God blessed his son Isaac, who then lived near Bir Lahai Roi. So this is the first we're hearing of a third woman in Sarah's life, or in Abraham's life. So Sarah was his chosen wife. And we don't know when Keturah came into the picture, but it could have been, after Sarah had died. And even, Abraham or David in the King David, when he was an old man, he had a woman who was a new wife. And so, Abraham was probably lonely. He married another woman, Keturah, and then she had a whole bunch of kids, a whole bunch. 12 descendants are listed in this genealogy here. And so it's interesting how 12 keeps showing up in the Bible, because we will see that Jacob's sons are 12 and the 12 tribes become the nation of Israel. But here, these other sons of Abraham, they also become nations, which is a part of God's blessing to Abraham, is I will make nations from you. And so while Isaac is going to lead to one nation, Israel, God's promise is bigger than Isaac. So Ishmael and all of Keturah's sons, they are all part of this covenant fulfillment of God saying, I am going to make nations from you. And the key part of this is because Isaac was the son of the chosen wife, Sarah. Even though he was not the firstborn, Abraham had the prerogative to choose to give him all of the inheritance because he was the son of his first and favored wife. We're going to see that again in Jacob's descendants, that Jacob is essentially choosing Joseph over all of his older brothers because Joseph is the son of his favorite wife. And so the same kind of thing is happening here with Isaac. But Abraham doesn't just cut all the other sons out of the picture. He gives them gifts while he is still alive. He is a generous person, and he blesses them and provides for them while he was still living. And so some of the nations that come out of this, we see the Midianites are probably going to be one of the major contention points in the history of Israel from these descendants. Um, and so that's something to note, that yes, these nations that are coming from Abraham's lineage, they're a part of God's promise to Abraham, but doesn't mean that it's always going to be easy for the nation of Israel to deal with these neighbors. There will be conflict in the future. And so readers of Genesis in the years well after Abraham's life, and that as they are being told these stories, they would have heard these nations, they would have heard these things said about the different people groups, and they would have it would have piqued their interest. Be like, wait a second, the Midianites are a part of our family too. Like, we're all kind of related to Abraham, and it would help make sense of what happened and how the nations were developed, which is a key part of what Genesis is doing overall, is helping us understand the relationship of nations within the human family, like that all these people are connected, and that knowing that all these people are connected, helps us remember that all people are made in the image of God, like Adam and Eve, all of them made in God's image. And all of these people being related means that there should be some kind of grace and invitation into family. And when the covenant with Abraham says, I will bless the world through you and your descendants, then that's the call of the people of the descendants of Abraham, is like, even though these people are your enemies from time to time, you need to find a way to be a blessing to them. And so that's all part of what's going on here. And again, Abraham, he died, buried next to Sarah in the tomb that he bought, that we looked at last week. And the expression here is he breathed his last, and he died, and he was gathered to his people. And so last week I kind of hinted at this gathered to his people as being like, there's a literal tradition of gathering the bones and putting them with the people. By the time of Jesus, the tombs that Jesus, like even the tomb that Jesus was buried in, he was the first body buried in that tomb. But over years, they would have put a lot of bodies in that tomb and put them in ossuaries and kept them collected there. Here, gathered to his people, it's just him and Sarah in that ossuary, in that tomb. And so that tradition had not yet fully been developed in that one tomb. And so there is a hint to an afterlife here. And this is really the first time we're getting an afterlife clue in the book of Genesis. That there's something beyond what's happening when somebody dies. And so that's an important thing to note here. Let's keep going. Get a little bit more family development, because we look at Ishmael's line in verse 12. This is the account of the family line of Abraham's son Ishmael, whom Sarah's slave Hagar, the Egyptian, bore to Abraham. These are the names of the sons of Ishmael, listed in the order of their birth. Nebaioth, the firstborn of Ishmael; Kedar, Abdil, Mibsam, Mishma, Duma, Masa, Hayad, Tema, Jetur, Naphish, and Kedemah. These were the sons of Ishmael, and these are the names of the 12 tribal rulers according to their settlements and camps. Ishmael lived 137 years. He breathed his last and died, and he was gathered to his people. His descendants settled in the area from Havilah to Shur, near the eastern border of Egypt, and as you go toward Asher. And they lived in hostility toward all the tribes related to them. So now we see that Isaac was down in the area where Ishmael was. Ishmael's descendants, they started to be hostile, which is a part of what the Lord said about Ishmael, that he would be a wild donkey of a man, and his descendants would carry on that tradition of being cantankerous and confrontational. And so they were. And so Ishmael is the non-elect son, and as has been the pattern for the book of Genesis, we see the non-elect sons first, and then we come back to the elect son. So we saw that with um, Cain, and then to Seth, and then Noah's sons came back to Shem. So we see this pattern going to the non-elect to come back to the elect, and so now we're going to get to Isaac, and it starts in verse 19. This is the account of the family line of Abraham's son, Isaac. And so this is a Toledat. This is the Toledat, one of those Genesis terms showing us a demarcation. Abraham became the father of Isaac, and Isaac was 40 years old when he married Rebekah, daughter of Bethuel, the Aramean from Paddan Aram, and sister of Laban the Aramean. Isaac prayed to the Lord on behalf of his wife because she was childless. The Lord answered his prayer, and his wife Rebekah became pregnant. The babies jostled each other within her, and she said, "Why is this happening to me?" So she went to inquire of the Lord. The Lord said to her, "Two nations are in your womb. The two peoples from within you will be separated. One people will be stronger than the other, and the older will serve the younger." When the time came for her to give birth, there were twin boys in her womb. The first to come out was red, and his whole body was like a hairy garment. So they named him Esau, which means red. After this, his brother came out with his hand grasping Esau's heel. So he was named Jacob. Isaac was 60 years old when Rebekah gave birth to them. The boys grew up, and Esau became a skillful hunter, a man of the open country, while Jacob was content to stay at home among the tents. Isaac, who had a taste for wild game, loved Esau, but Rebekah loved Jacob. Once, when Jacob was cooking some stew, Esau came in from the open country famished. He said to Jacob, "Quick, let me have some of that red stew. I'm famished." That is why he's also called Edom, which means red also. Jacob replied, "First, sell me your birthright." "Look, I'm about to die," Esau said. "What good is the birthright to me?" But Jacob said, "Swear to me first." So he swore an oath to him, selling his birthright to Jacob. Then Jacob gave Esau some bread and some lentil stew. He ate and drank, and then got up and left. So Esau despised his birthright. So there is a bit of foreshadowing in this passage. There is an echo into the life of Abraham and Sarah, and so we see these design patterns in Scripture, and specifically with the patriarchs, we see generation after generation struggling with infertility and turning to the Lord and praying and seeking Him, God granting the gift of children. But there's still conflict within those children, within the families around these children. And so even in the Lord's message to Rebekah, he says, "These two nations are within you and they will fight." And so that is going to happen. And we see the first indication of this conflict here in this section. So when we look at barrenness in the Bible, anytime you see a story of a woman who is unable to conceive, there is a flag for you, a sign for us. Pay attention to this woman, because in ancient culture, barrenness was a sign of disfavor from the Lord, from their gods, right? In the pagan cultures around them. In the Bible, we see when we are given highlight images of women who are unable to conceive, it's usually those stories are told to us because God is going to do something amazing. And so this is a second story like that. And God does make it possible. After they pray, God does make it possible for Rebekah to conceive. Rachel, Jacob's favored wife in the next generation, she's also not going to be able to conceive. We will see Eli's mother. She won't be able to conceive. And then jump forward even further to um, John the Baptist. Elizabeth is old and unable to conceive, and God makes a way. And so all of these stories in the Bible like help us to see like, oh, there's something important here, that God is doing a miracle in these women. And so she went to inquire to the Lord, and she probably went to one of the altars that Abraham had built. Because remember, as he traveled around, he um, built altars. He encountered the Lord, and so these are holy spaces for the people of Abraham. And so she went to inquire the Lord, and the Lord told her what was going on and what was going to happen. The younger son would lead the older son, which is a inverse of what normally happens in patriarchal cultures. And so that could also indicate why Rebecca loved Jacob, because the Lord told her that Jacob was going to lead. He was going to be the primary, and the older would not. And so that could have influenced Rebecca's actions towards Jacob. And the two sons are total opposites. You know, Esau is red and hairy, and Jacob is smooth. Esau is an outdoorsman. Jacob is more indoorsy, and so like there's a lot of contrast between them. Uh, Esau would go and it's a man of hunting and of the open fields, and Jacob stayed close to the tents. And so all of these different elements are there, showing us a contrast between the two sons. And the first real story that we have of them is Jacob cooking delicious stew, and Esau coming in totally hungry and willing to trade everything for a bowl of stew. And having had stew, I even had stew today. I love stew. I would not trade my inheritance for stew. So I don't know if Jacob was just that good of a cook or if Esau just didn't care. Here, though, the text tells us that Esau despised his birthright. He was taking something that his father would have given to him and treated it like garbage, made it worthless. And so we're getting an indication of Esau's character in this short little story. But Esau is willing to sell it because he's like, well, I'm going to die if I don't eat, so what does it matter? And Jacob is a schemer. He's a plotter. And so here this is his first plot. But he's not the only plotter in the family, because as we keep reading chapter 26, we see an echo in the life of Abraham, an echo from the life of Abraham in the life of Isaac. 26 verse 1. Now there was a famine in the land, besides the previous famine in Abraham's time, and Isaac went to Abimelech, king of the Philistines in Gerar. The Lord appeared to Isaac and said, do not go down to Egypt. Live in the land where I tell you to live. Stay in this land for a while, and I will be with you, and I will bless you. For to you and your descendants I will give all these lands, and will confirm the oath I swore to your father Abraham. I will make your descendants as numerous as the stars in the sky, and will give them all these lands, and through your offspring all nations on the earth will be blessed, because Abraham obeyed me and did everything I required of him, keeping my commands, my decrees, and my instructions. So Isaac stayed in Gerar. When the men of that place asked him about his wife, he said, she is my sister, because he was afraid to say, she is my wife. He thought the men of this place might kill me on account of Rebekah, because she is beautiful. When Isaac had been there a long time, Abimelech, king of the Philistines, looked down from a window and saw Isaac caressing his wife Rebekah. So Abimelech summoned Isaac and said, she is really your wife. Why did you say she is my sister? Isaac answered him, because I thought I might lose my life on account of her. Then Abimelech said, what is this you have done to us? One of the men might well have slept with your wife, and you would have brought guilt upon us. So Abimelech gave orders to all the people, anyone who harms this man or his wife shall surely be put to death. Okay, so the story starts, there's another famine. which would have been common in this region. Like it's a dry, arid land, and rain is infrequent, and so a famine comes, and Isaac starts to move to where he can better care for his flocks and his inheritance. So he's going south, and Abraham went to Egypt, and God tells Isaac, "Don't go to Egypt. Stay here in the land of the Philistines in Gerar." Uh, Abraham also ended up in Gerar and stayed there. And the same echoes are happening again. Isaac is afraid that people will kill him to take his wife. So he says, "Tell everyone you're my sister." It's a perfect plan. It's so dumb. And it's not a perfect plan. And Abimelech just sees Isaac, like, the way the text is reading is like being very amorous with his sister. And so Abimelech is like, "What the heck, dude?" And this is probably not the same Abimelech that Abraham was with. It's probably a family name. Abimelech means "my father is king." And so it's probably just a name saying, "My father is king. My name is also my father is king." And so he's confronted and he says, "Look, I didn't want to die." And so then Abimelech protects Isaac, which is just so contrary to the way the world should work. It's like, you lied to me. Why should I take care of you? Why should I defend you? Unless God is on your side. And here God is protecting Isaac in his own foolishness again, because God said, "I will bless you, I will protect you." And one of the things that we see throughout Genesis is that even when the people that God has chosen act foolishly, God is still protecting them. And um, so that's good news for us because we need God's protection all the time. So here we go on to see Abimelech protecting Isaac, setting out rules against other people trying to harm Isaac in any way. And so how does that go? Verse 12. Isaac planted crops in that land, and the same year reaped 100-fold because the Lord blessed him. The man became rich, and his wealth continued to grow until he became very wealthy. He had so many flocks and herds with his servants that the Philistines envied him. So all the wells that his father's servants had dug in the time of his father Abraham, the Philistines stopped up, filling them with earth. Then Abimelech said to Isaac, "Move away from us. You have become too powerful for us." So Isaac moved away from there and encamped in the valley of Gerar, where he settled. Isaac reopened the wells that had been dug in the time of his father Abraham, which the Philistines had stopped up after Abraham died, and he gave them the same names his father had given them. Isaac's servants dug in the valley and discovered a well of fresh water there, but the herders of Gerar quarreled with those of Isaac and said, "That water is ours." So he named the well Esek, because they disputed with him. Then they dug another well, but they quarreled over that one also. So he named it Sitnah. He moved on from there and dug another well, and no one quarreled over it. He named it Rehoboth, saying, "Now the Lord has given us room, and we will flourish in the land." From there he went up to Beersheba. That night the Lord appeared to him and said, "I am the God of your father Abraham. Do not be afraid, for I am with you. I will bless you, and I will increase the number of your descendants for the sake of my servant Abraham." So Isaac built an altar there and called on the name of the Lord. There he pitched his tent, and there his servants dug a well. Meanwhile, Abimelech had come to him from Gerar with Ahuzath, his personal advisor, and Phicol, the commander of his forces. Isaac asked them, "Why have you come to me, since you were hostile to me and sent me away?" They answered, "We saw clearly that the Lord was with you, so we said, there ought to be a sworn agreement between us and you. Let us make a treaty with you that you will do us no harm, just as we did not harm you, but always treated you well and sent you away peacefully. And now you are blessed by the Lord." Isaac then made a feast for them, and they ate and drank. Early the next morning, the men swore an oath to each other. Then Isaac sent them on their way, and they went away peacefully. That day, Isaac's servants came to him and told him about the well they had dug. They said, "We found water." He named it Sheba, and to this day, the name of that town has been Beersheba. All right. So Isaac is blessed. Things are going really well. He's doing so well. He's decided, I'm going to start putting down roots, literally, and he's planting crops, which, he's a nomadic herder. And so the crops are probably to support his livestock. And so he's really sending a signal to the people of Gerar, like, I'm here to stay. And his crops are abundant, 100-fold, and so he's doing really well. Why? Because the Lord has blessed him, and so he is. Everything is going great, so great that Abimelech's like, "You're doing too well. Go away. Our people and your people keep fighting and having conflict over the wells and the water, so you need to keep moving and get out of our space." And so Isaac does. Keeps going, digs a well, more conflict. Goes, digs another well, more conflict. Third well, no conflict. So he's like, all right, we'll stay here. This is where we're going to build our tent. We're going to put down our roots. We're going to dig our wells. We're going to do our things here. This is our land. And so for his father, like he was a wanderer. He was a resident alien. And so now Abraham or Isaac is really taking on the ownership of land in this section. So something just happened and I lost my notes. Just a second. So so he is building altars, digging wells, pitching the tents, all of these different things, like really taking on ownership. And then Abimelech comes to make peace with him. And the reason is because they have seen that the Lord, and in the text there, Yahweh is used. And so this is not a follower of Yahweh, the way the descendants of Isaac are going to call on the name of the Lord, but they know the God of Abraham and the God of Isaac, and his name is Yahweh. And so they're saying, we see that your God is with you, and we don't want to have trouble with you. And so this is a peace treaty between Isaac and the descendants, the Abimelech, the family of Abimelech, essentially, the Philistines. And we see here as well, Isaac is a good host. He provides a feast for them as a part of this peace treaty. And the people of the Philistines were the aggressors throughout most of this account, but Isaac is still the one who is making peace through hospitality. Yes, they came. We don't want you to hurt us. And Isaac says, I won't hurt you. I will provide for you. And and so that's this treaty between Isaac and the Philistines. It's not going to last because they will, when the people come out of slavery in Egypt, there is going to be great conflict with the Canaanites. Most of the Canaanites that, when we read the historical books, are going to be driven from the land. They're going to be conquered. But the Philistines are never fully driven from the land. And so they are an ongoing conflict for the people of Israel throughout their history. And so all the way through David and Solomon, we'll see the Philistines over and over and over again. So this treaty is good. It provides peace for Isaac in his time, but it will not be an ultimate solution for their descendants in the future. So, all right. And then there's a little bit of chapter 26 talking about Esau and his wives. And so I didn't want to get into all that tonight. So we'll jump to that next week. So that is 24 through 26. So any questions or thoughts, things that you may have picked up on that you would like to discuss? And
I had one question.
Yeah, Sydney.
Okay. So towards the beginning tonight, you shared when Rebecca, when the servant went and got Rebecca,
Mhm.
why didn't the servant give any gifts to the father?
Taking the daughter off his hands was the gift.
Hey.
Yeah, maybe. I mean, now, are you asking this because you guys are engaged and you're kind of working some stuff out right now? So,
Yeah, that's why.
yeah, I just want to know why you're asking. So, you know, I think in giving gifts to the family, like in general, like it is
Okay.
all part of the family. Even when we look at like Laban is her brother, and in the one of the reasons why Abraham was saying to Sarah, like, tell everybody I'm your brother, is because the brother had a level of negotiation power in those relationships. And so that could be a carryover even here in giving gifts to Laban to say, like, I know that you are more of the power structure in this family and culturally. So that could be part of it. If we look at the trend with Abraham trying to protect himself by being a brother, Isaac trying to protect himself by being a brother, like there's some kind of power here that the brother has. So that could be part of it. But still, like he's being very generous to their family. Like the gifts he's giving are extravagant in general. So yeah, a good question. There's little things like that where just like, oh, that's interesting. But yeah, the kinds of gifts though, like the nose ring and the bracelets and stuff for Rebecca, like those are like uh the danger here is that we could read that and say this is like a kind of branding type thing. Like it's like you're mine now. And and that is not always super comfortable for our culture. Like like to say like even the wedding ring, like the wedding ring is a symbol of affection and love between a husband and wife, and it's supposed to be an eternal circle and all this stuff, but it's made of gold. It's a precious metal, and it's essentially like you exchange rings between a husband and wife. It's saying like you're mine. And more than anything, like you are mine. And that's part of what this tradition of rings is. And so in giving her these rings, the servant is saying like you are now a part of this family and not a part of that family. So yeah.
So main takeaway is do not give Sydney a nose ring. Is that where we're getting at?
No, the main takeaway is don't send a man hundreds of miles away to give Sydney a nose ring. That's the main takeaway. It gets complicated. So,
okay. Hey, I'll come to you if I need help.
Yeah.
No, I do have a serious question though.
Mhm.
So one thing that you talked about was about the afterlife. And one thing that I thought was curious is that, so you say this is the first time that they talk about an afterlife, but one thing that happened was, and I can't remember his name for the life of me right now, the guy that ended up walking with God and then he was no more. He was taken to heaven.
Oh yeah, yeah. Enoch.
So is Enoch, isn't that kind of an indication that there was an afterlife? And that and kind of a further question to that is, what about Adam and Eve? I mean, there was no talk about sacrifice and making yourself holy until later in Genesis. Where are they at? Are they kind of like in Dante's first ring of hell or what?
Yeah. Yeah. So Enoch, the Lord took him. Is that what we hear with Enoch? So, so yeah. So he's kind of unique in that here that like I should have been more clear. Like it's more of uh, a community in the afterlife being taken to the Father. Like it's not like Enoch is gone and we don't know where he went. Here is more, and he was gathered to his people, and so that there's other people that are in this eternal state of some sort. And we don't know what that is yet in Genesis. And so part of the expression Abraham's bosom. Have you heard of this? Like, and even with Jesus and the parable of Lazarus and the rich man, he says he's with Abraham. And so part of the Hebrew cosmology of the afterlife is that there is a place of the dead. And so our understanding of heaven and hell is very much shaped by a lot of by Jesus's teaching, where Jesus does talk about Gehenna and eternal destruction. These are things that are a part of the New Testament more than they are a part of the Old Testament. They're not absent from the Old Testament, but they're really fleshed out in the New Testament. For the Old Testament, the idea of Sheol in the Psalms, going down to Sheol, is not hell. It's just a place of the dead. It's like the abyss. Like you go and you are there. And so from that, people have developed ideas of purgatory and all these different kinds of things. And even Abraham's bosom is that it's not heaven, it's not hell. What is this? And so this is where like those ideas of purgatory kind of are formulated. And so it's not until we see, in Paul's teaching, like to be absent from the body is to be present with the Lord. Like the idea of like when I'm dead, I'm right in the presence of God. That is a development over time in the Hebrew mind. And so at this point in Genesis, they don't have those clear understandings of what the afterlife looks like. So, but yeah, it's a really interesting to study. But you mentioned Dante's Inferno, and Dante's and his different rings and all this different stuff. Like that is, most of that is just tradition that developed over time in the church. Like, we don't know that there are all these different rings, and we hear of like the seventh level of heaven from Paul. Like he knows a man who was taken into the highest heaven, or it's like, but Paul gives us no explanation of what that means. He just like says it and then just keeps writing. It's like, Paul, slow down, man. What are you talking about? So yeah, so there are some great mysteries around the afterlife. And so the reason I highlight it here was just because like this is where these ideas start to like take some shape. And so this is the first time we're referenced to the community of afterlife, whereas Enoch is like the Lord took him and everybody else just died, right? So yeah. So, but that's a good question. And yeah, there's a lot of times where I think about eternity and heaven and hell and all these things, and my brain just kind of melts.
Yep.
It's like, I don't know what to do with this.
Am I really going to enjoy playing with harps for all eternity? That doesn't sound like fun.
Yeah, and even that, like, that's the angel's job. Like, when we die, we're not angels.
Right.
And so I'm like, why are we taking angels' jobs? The Bible tells us we're going to judge the angels. Like, we in eternity are like the angels' bosses. So I don't want to play harps all the time. That's their job. So they're probably way better at it than I am anyway. So
Good point.
they've had eternity to practice. So
yeah, I apologize for bringing in Dante's Inferno, but I just remember that the first ring, their only sin was the fact that they were born before Christ was around. Right. So when you have these concepts of Sheol or Abraham's bosom, it kind of makes you think that there is a holding place that people go to before the second coming of Christ. Because of the second coming, that's when you go to the different areas. And you either, if you're in Abraham's bosom, you go to heaven. If you're in Sheol, then you go to the ring of, not the ring of fire, but you go to the lake of fire, because that's what happens at the end. You're in an area, and then after everything's done and the book is closed, God's like, okay, you guys go to the lake of fire and you guys come with me,
Yeah. Yes. And there are just different church traditions that are holding to different explanations of those holding areas. Like,
yeah,
like it feels like in eternal, like afterlife is a waiting room.
Yeah.
And so like the Seventh-day Adventist denomination, they have a doctrine of soul sleep, where you are, after you die, you are not consciously aware of being dead until the judgment. And then we face judgment,
Creepy.
and then it all is sorted,
Interesting.
between the sheep and the goats, as Jesus says.
Right.
And then there's the Catholic teaching with purgatory. So
Yep.
there's a lot of different perspectives. And I actually listened to a podcast by a guy named Preston Sprinkle. I'm going to make a note. I will include a link to that episode because he's talking about the three main views of hell in Christian history. And so I'll include a note for that. Include Preston Sprinkle podcast. So, and he does a better job than I do right now talking through those three
Okay.
views. So, yeah, but he doesn't get into the heaven side. He's just talking about hell. And so this week was, here are the three views. And then next week, which I haven't heard yet, so I can't endorse it, is he's going to give his, like, which one he leans to.
Okay.
So, and I don't know what it is yet. So spoiler, I don't know. But just the overview episode at least was helpful and interesting. So,
Okay.
all right.
Thank you.
Yeah. Any other questions?
I have one
Yes, Kathy.
question. Well, and actually an observation to start with. Getting back to Rebecca in chapter 24,
Mhm.
her watering the camels. That was, it seems, for as much as a camel can hold, that was a heck of a lot of water for her to draw.
Yes.
Boy, I don't even know how many gallons that would be. But something that ties to that is there's a couple other places in Genesis where the passage of time seems kind of, it's just kind of wonky. You don't really know ages of people exactly and that kind of thing. The part where it indicates that Rebecca left with her nurse, I was wondering, was she a younger child that she still needed a nurse, or was she ill? Is there any
Yeah.
indication of that? Because if she's hauling up all that water for the camels, she had to have been old enough to do that,
Right. Yeah. So I did read about the nurse specifically because I was like, that is weird. So the Bible background commentary talking about that says that the accompanying nurse, it would have been suitable for a woman betrothed to a wealthy man to have an entourage of servants, and the nurse would have higher status as the nurturer of the child, who would now remain as part of her new household and serve as a chaperone on the return journey. And so this is probably like this household servant that was closest to Rebecca for her whole life.
Okay.
And so Rebecca is, likely 16 years old, in that range. So she's not in her 20s. She's a teenager, which was normal marrying age back then. And so she could do the work of drawing the water. It would have been a lot of work. You're right. It's many gallons. And so it's because camels are very thirsty animals. But yeah, it would have been a lot of work. And that is one of the signs that why the servant put that in that oracle, that mechanistic oracle, was to say, like, I want somebody who will go above and beyond, to care for the animals, to care for strangers and be hospitable. That's who Isaac needs. Yeah. And so she is definitely a good candidate for marriage for Isaac. So yeah, but the nurse is not like she's like 8 and they're like, hey, take care of this girl. But a close servant and a chaperone is kind of the picture there of what's happening, because the family is sending her across the world basically. And so like somebody needs to watch out for Rebecca on the journey.
Right. Sending her with someone that they've really only known a few days.
Right.
Too.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Right. Who, like, they don't know how he knows Abraham really.
Right.
Right. Like, no, I'm from Abraham's house. Like, oh, okay. So yeah, major leap of faith for her family to do this. So
If that was my daughter, that'd be a big no. So we wouldn't even get off the ground.
right. It's a
So
different
kudos
world.
to the family.
Yeah. So
Okay, thanks.
yeah, that's a great question, Kathy. Yeah, thank you for highlighting that, because that was a weird little note. Like, what is this nurse all about? So yeah. Good.
So kind of a jump off of that, Jason.
Mhm.
Is there a potential that that person would have been the midwife
Maybe. Like that's there
that brought her into the world?
that could be, but the text doesn't say that specifically, and so
Just as
in the
nurse.
in the commentaries that I read around that, they all were kind of like chaperone thoughts, like more than saying like she was there from birth to death or whatever. Like we don't have that clearly spelled out. So
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Yeah. So she was in her teens. He was in his 40s. Sounds legit.
you know, it's a different world. It's a different world. So yeah, you bring up the midwife. Midwifery in the Bible is actually a very interesting topic of study. So like if you ever are interested in looking up the different, like what is the role of a midwife, bringing life into the world, and like in Exodus the midwives are there to and they're saving the babies' lives. Like that's amazing. But even later in the prophets, there's images of them birthing the word of God and like being midwives of God's revelation. So yeah, it's a very interesting image throughout Scripture. So, but I digress, because that's not
Midwifery, is that like the study of being a midwife?
yeah, the topic of being a midwife. Yeah, midwifery.
Okay.
Yeah.
Sorry, I was just curious because I'd never heard that word before. So when you said that, I was sitting there going, is that like the male version of a midwife? Or I don't.
No.
Okay.
No. Yeah. So that's the study of midwives, essentially. So.
Got it.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Well. All right. Well, it is getting late, so I appreciate you guys and your time tonight. Next week, I had a division for several chapters, and I was looking at them today, and I was like, these are really long. There's a lot, so I might kind of shrink it down a little bit. So extend our time in Genesis a bit. I just have to think about why I divided them that way again in the first place. So stay tuned for that. But yeah, things are going to get really heated between Jacob and Esau. So it's going to be like an episode of Maury. So just get ready, because there's a whole bunch of who's the father, who's the mother. It's fun times. So with that, y'all, I'll see you guys next week. And have a great rest of your week.
Thanks, Jason.
Okay.
Good night.
See you later.